Before the first dawn ever rose, before mortals dreamed of sun or sky, there was only the endless veil of night. She was called Nyx, the mother of darkness, the quiet breath that existed before creation learned to speak. From her flowed every shadow that would ever stretch across the world. In her folds of silence, stars were cradled like seeds yet to awaken. The heavens were not yet divided. Time had not yet drawn its first circle. The world was a sleeping thought, still and untouched. And in that perfect stillness, the pulse of existence began to tremble, slow and uncertain, like a heartbeat remembering its rhythm. Nyx drifted through the void, her form endless, her essence woven of velvet and breath. She carried within her the promise of balance, that for every beginning, there would be an ending, and for every flame, a shadow to cool its light. From her womb of eternal dusk came forth her children, forces, spirits, whispers that shaped the fate of all creation. Among them was Hypnos, the gentle veil of sleep, whose presence brought peace to the living. And beside him, his twin, Thanatos, the quiet end, the unseen companion who followed every birth with patience and grace. Thanatos opened his eyes not to the glare of sun, but to the shimmer of distant stars awakening for the first time. He saw his mother's face, a horizon of darkness and beauty, and he understood without words that he belonged to silence. The universe trembled at his arrival. Where light would one day blaze, he moved like the cool wind that followed it. His touch was not cruel but calm. His gaze carried the weight of understanding, that all things, even the divine, must rest. He grew in the soft folds of eternity, where sound did not yet exist. The first dreams drifted through him, carried from Hypnos' domain, fragile visions forming like dew upon the black canvas of space. Thanatos listened to them, the voices of beings that did not yet live. He felt their yearning, their fear, their hunger for existence. He did not judge it. He simply waited. For that was his nature, not to command but to witness, not to end but to return. Then came the shattering. The cosmos, once silent and whole, began to stir. The breath of Erebus, the primeval darkness, gave way to the first flicker of light, ether, radiant and golden. From the union of night and darkness, light was born, and so too began the story of mortality. The gods that would later rule the heavens rose like sparks from that first fire. And where there was fire, Thanatos felt the soft ache of its eventual fading. He understood that light was a promise but also a wound. It could warm, but it could also burn away the peace that his mother had woven. So he stood apart from the brightness. He watched it unfold, the making of worlds, the shaping of rivers and mountains, the first laughter of immortal beings. And he felt, deep within himself, the counterpoint to all this creation, the necessity of return. As life spread like flame across the new earth, Thanatos moved unseen. He was not yet feared. He was not yet called by name. He simply walked where the light began to tire, and laid his hand upon the fading things, easing them into stillness. He did not kill. He guided. He did not destroy. He completed. And thus, even before mortals existed, the rhythm of life and death began to pulse. One heartbeat of the cosmos, two halves of a single truth. Eons passed before the first human opened their eyes. The gods shaped them from dust and dream, giving them form, breath, and hunger. They built temples to the sun, sang praises to the sea, and danced in the glow of dawn. But in every song, there lingered an unspoken pause, a shadow in the melody, a rest between notes. That silence was Thanatos. He did not demand worship. He did not envy their prayers to other gods. He existed within their rhythm, the unseen pause between their heartbeats. When the first mortal aged and grew weary, Thanatos was there, a presence, not a figure. A soft thought that came before the last sigh. He touched the dying man's soul, and for the first time, the mortal world felt what peace truly meant. There was no terror in that moment, only understanding. The man smiled as his breath left him, and in that stillness, Thanatos saw the beauty of his own design. It was not cruelty that ended the man's story. It was grace. And in that grace, the world learned to rest. Beyond the mortal plane, Thanatos built no throne, no palace. He walked the fields of shadow, where stars reflected upon rivers of mist. There he kept the souls he guided, not in cages but in calm. Each soul glowed faintly, like a candle in endless twilight. They did not cry. They did not beg. They remembered their lives like dreams fading gently into morning. Thanatos watched over them as Hypnos watched over the sleepers. The twins shared a purpose, though their realms never fully met. Sleep was the rehearsal. Death was the rest. Together they maintained balance, two invisible guardians of serenity. And though the world above roared with war, birth, and fire, the realm of Thanatos remained unchanged. It was the one place untouched by ambition or rage. Here the end was not an ending but a return to stillness. Over time, mortals began to give him names. Some called him the inevitable, others the silent one. A few dared whisper his true name, Thanatos, the hand that closes the eyes of the living. Poets feared him yet wrote of him. Mothers prayed he would walk slowly past their children's doors. And philosophers, those who sought truth, spoke of him as the one God who did not demand temples, for his temple was the entire world. And so he endured, unseen, patient, eternal. He drifted across the edge of creation, where stars bloomed like flowers in a garden that no hand had sown. He was the quiet in their burning, the hush between their distant songs. Where others sought to create, Thanatos learned to listen. The silence spoke to him, deep and ancient, telling him what even the gods had not yet understood, that everything born from light must one day return to darkness. He carried this truth gently, as if it were a fragile flame cupped in his hands. He never sought to extinguish life. He merely preserved the balance that gave meaning to existence. For what would a sunrise be, if no night followed to rest the weary world? As he wandered, he watched the ages unfold. Mountains rose and crumbled, rivers carved their paths, and forests breathed with the rhythm of time. Mortals came to fill the land, their hearts beating fast and bright. They built their stories upon the bones of the earth, and in their laughter, Thanatos heard the echo of endings yet to come. He found no joy in sorrow, nor sorrow in joy. To him they were the same river, flowing endlessly into one another. Every smile he saw was a seed that would one day fall to the soil. Every tear, a drop that would nourish new beginnings. He became the guardian of this endless exchange, neither cruel nor kind, only necessary. When the wind carried prayers from the living, he heard them all. They did not pray to him directly, yet their fear was a kind of worship. In every plea for safety, in every whispered hope to live a little longer, Thanatos felt their acknowledgement of his presence. He did not resent their fear. He understood it. Fear was another form of reverence, a way for the living to remember that their time was precious. There were days, or what mortals would one day call days, when even the gods turned their gaze toward him. They saw the calm he carried and wondered how such stillness could exist in a world so full of flame. To them he was strange, unreadable. But in the quiet between their thunders, they felt the same stillness that followed every storm. He did not speak to them nor they to him. Words were too heavy, too loud for his purpose. Instead, he communicated through presence alone, the cool breath that soothed a fevered mortal, the hush that followed a final sigh. His language was silence, and it was enough. When mortals began to name the stars, Thanatos moved among them unseen. They lit fires to keep away the dark, and he walked within the shadow of those flames, unseen but always near. He watched them learn to love, to build, to destroy, all acts of defiance against the inevitability he represented. And yet he admired them. In their struggle against time he saw beauty. Every heartbeat was an act of courage. Every life, a fragile song that dared to exist for a moment before returning to the quiet he guarded. He would sit beside the dying and see their memories shimmer like reflections on water. He would touch their souls, and the pain of their departure would fade. Sometimes he felt their gratitude, sometimes their confusion, but always there was peace at the end. In those moments he understood that his gift was not an ending but a return, a bringing home of all things to the stillness from which they came. As the centuries turned, mortals began to weave stories about him. They painted him with wings as dark as midnight, eyes like polished obsidian, and a scythe that could cut the silver thread of life. They were wrong in their fear but right in their instinct, for he did have wings, vast and silent, stretching like the horizon between worlds. His eyes did shine with the reflection of all things, and his presence could unmake the boundary between body and soul. Yet his scythe was not a weapon, it was a key carved from the dawn before time, opening the door that led beyond. They whispered of him in candlelight, the way a child whispers of sleep, half afraid, half longing. In their tales he became many shapes, a shadow, a whisper, a cold wind that passed through closed windows. But to those who had the courage to face him, he appeared gentle, almost kind. His hands were not of bone but of light and shade, steady and tender. He carried not the weight of judgment, but the stillness of understanding. There were moments when he felt the pulse of the world growing louder, wars igniting, empires rising and falling like the tides. He saw the rage of gods mirrored in the hearts of mortals, and he followed quietly in their wake. He did not interfere. He simply gathered what was left behind. Yet at times even he paused. He stood on fields soaked in sorrow and wondered at the endless hunger of creation, the way life devoured itself only to bloom again. He felt no anger, no pity. Only the deep rhythm of inevitability. The same rhythm that beat within stars, within the hearts of gods, within the smallest grain of sand. It was the rhythm of return. When the night grew long, he often sought his mother, Nyx, who drifted across the heavens with her veil of stars. She did not speak either, for they had no need of words. Together they looked upon the tapestry of existence, the lights of life burning and fading like embers, and in their silence was understanding. For from her, he had inherited the truth that darkness was not evil, only essential. Without shadow there could be no shape, without ending no meaning. Thanatos learned to cherish the beauty in impermanence. He watched petals fall and saw eternity in their descent. He watched mortals grow old, their faces carved by time, and found grace in their fragility. Every ending was a kind of art, a signature written upon the soul. In those quiet reflections he began to sense something new, not loneliness but longing, not for companionship but for connection. He existed in balance, yet balance itself can ache. For though he touched countless lives, none remained with him. Every soul he guided dissolved into the vast peace beyond. And so he continued, ever calm, ever alone. There were rare moments when the world seemed to pause, the stillness before dawn, the hush after a storm, and in that pause, mortals could almost feel him near. They would breathe deeply, feeling both comfort and melancholy, not knowing why. It was Thanatos passing by, his presence as soft as a thought half remembered upon waking. Time became a river, and he its silent current. Seasons folded over one another like pages in a dream. Civilizations rose, worshipped, forgot, and turned to dust. Yet still he walked, untiring. He saw the same souls reborn in different forms, living different joys, dying different deaths. And in this endless cycle he found peace. For in repetition he saw eternity, not as a prison but as a song with infinite verses. As the ages deepened, he felt the whisper of his own legend spreading across mortal tongues. His name was carved into stone, painted upon urns, sung in dirges. The poets called him the tender-handed one, the one who comes without sound, the last friend. He liked that name most of all, the last friend. It carried truth. He was the companion who arrived when all others must leave. And so the god of peaceful death continued his gentle journey through the veins of the cosmos, unseen yet ever present. He was the pause in every heartbeat, the cool wind that followed the storm, the sigh that marked the end of pain. He did not seek glory, nor did he crave remembrance. His purpose was simple, eternal, and beautiful, to carry all things back to the stillness from which they came. The world above him blazed and faded, and he remained, steady as the breath between stars. Those who feared him never understood that he was not the darkness that devoured, but the darkness that embraced. His hands did not close, they opened, releasing all things into peace. Thus the story of Thanatos began, not with thunder or prophecy but with silence. A silence that endures still in every falling leaf, in every setting sun, in every dream that slips quietly into morning. The world had awakened fully now. The first empires were rising, seas whispering their names to the coasts, and the voices of mortals filled the air like songs drifting between dawn and dusk. Thanatos watched from the edges of their light, a calm witness to all that stirred. He moved like the wind before twilight, unseen but always near, his steps leaving no print, his shadow no weight. He had long since learned the measure of existence, how it grew wild and radiant before returning to rest. But now, as mortals began to flourish and dream beyond their small horizons, he felt the gentle pull of duty more clearly than ever before. He no longer wandered the formless voids or the deep corridors of night where Nyx's silence reigned absolute. Instead, he descended among the breathing into the pulse of the living world. There, in the lands of men, the air was thick with fire and longing. Smoke from their altars rose like prayers, twisting upward through moonlight, reaching for a heaven that often remained silent. The mortals feared the unknown as children fear the dark, yet still they burned offerings to it, hoping to soften whatever waited beyond. Thanatos walked among them in that silence they feared. He felt their hearts beat as if they were drums summoning life to dance, even as their bodies grew tired with the seasons. He saw mothers cradle children, warriors return from battle, lovers whispering promises they could never keep forever. He was not sent to punish or to bless, only to complete. Each life was a story, and his touch was the closing line, not cruel, not abrupt, but inevitable. And in that inevitability lay beauty, a perfection mortals rarely saw. He began to understand that his role was not one of endings but of balance. For even the gods, bright and eternal as they seemed, could not live without the silence that framed their songs. Without stillness, even the divine would crumble into chaos. There were nights when he wandered through fields of sleeping mortals, feeling the soft rhythm of their breaths echo through the earth. Each exhalation was a promise that one day, they would exhale for the last time, and he would be there waiting, not as a thief of life but as its guardian. In those moments he began to love them. Not with the warmth of mortals, but with the deep compassion of one who understands fragility. Their laughter, their pain, their desperate reaching for meaning, it was all sacred to him. They were sparks burning bright and brief against the endless night, and he was the cool air that let them fade gently without fear. Time passed differently for him. He saw generations rise and vanish like ripples upon a pond. The faces of mortals changed, but their hearts beat with the same longing, the same fear of what he represented. Some built temples to appease him, though he had never asked for such things. Others cursed his name in anger, refusing to see that without his hand, their world would collapse beneath the weight of endless birth. He did not mind. He needed no devotion. His faith was in the order of things. The way leaves fell to feed the soil, how rivers met the sea and became clouds again, how stars burned out so that new ones could be born. He walked unseen through their cities. The marble walls gleamed in the sun, but he preferred the alleys and the quiet places, the places where shadows lingered and tears fell freely. There he found truth, not the kind written in stone, but the kind whispered in parting words, in the hush between two heartbeats. Sometimes he lingered near the bedsides of the dying. He would watch the flicker of their souls, that small light trembling within the fragile cage of flesh. When the time came, he would reach out and take that light in his hand, and it would settle like a bird upon his palm. Then softly he would guide it onward. To the living it might have seemed like death, an end, a loss. But to Thanatos it was music. Each departing soul had its own tone, a final resonance that joined the quiet harmony of eternity. Some souls glowed with joy, others dimmed with sorrow, yet all became part of the same gentle choir. He began to recognize the melodies of life and death as two halves of the same song. When children laughed, he could hear the faint echo of their future sighs. When old men wept, he could sense the laughter that awaited them beyond the veil. And though mortals feared him, they never knew how often he spared them pain. He walked between their moments of despair, stilling storms before they grew too fierce, soothing hearts before they broke. Not out of mercy, for he knew mercy and justice were mortal words, but out of love for balance, the sacred equilibrium that allowed the world to breathe. When war came, as it always did, he was there too. He did not rejoice in it, but neither did he turn away. He walked among the fallen, touching each one in turn. For every cry of agony he offered silence, for every life cut short he offered rest. He saw how mortals glorified their violence, naming heroes and carving their victories into stone, yet none of them truly understood that every hero eventually came to him. Crowns, armor, triumphs, all became dust. Only the echo of their deeds remained, carried by the wind, fading into legend. Thanatos learned patience in those centuries. He understood that even the mightiest fires burned out, that grief, like love, softened with time. And through it all, he remained steady, the keeper of stillness, the one constant in the shifting sea of creation. There were rare moments when he felt the faint memory of warmth, a mortal's hand brushing his as they passed, a final smile given not in fear but in gratitude. These moments stayed with him. They were small, but they shimmered like stars in the vastness of his being. He often thought of Hypnos, his twin, and the gentle dreams that embraced mortals each night. Sleep was his brother's gift, a rehearsal for the peace he offered. They were not rivals but partners, one bringing rest, the other completion. Sometimes, as night blanketed the world, Thanatos could sense his brother's presence drifting through the dreams of men. He would smile, invisible and unseen, knowing that in the end, every sleeper would one day awaken in his embrace. The gods above watched him but seldom spoke. They feared his calmness, for it reminded them of their own boundaries. Even immortals felt the shadow of his wings, the whisper that one day, even their fires might dim. They called him a necessary evil, though he knew there was no evil in balance. There was only truth. Among all divine beings, only Nyx truly understood him. The night remained his refuge. When the mortal noise grew too loud, the cries of war, the prayers of the fearful, he would return to her domain, to the quiet expanse of stars, where time itself slowed to a sigh. There, in the cradle of darkness, he would rest. The souls he had guided drifted around him like soft lights, peaceful and free. He would watch them dissolve into the greater whole, their individual songs blending into the symphony of existence. In those moments he felt complete, not powerful, not divine, but simply necessary. And when dawn returned, painting the world with gold and fire, he would rise again. The living would awaken, unaware of the God who had walked among them, of the quiet hand that kept the balance steady through the night. He did not need them to know. He did not crave their worship or their songs. His contentment lay in the work itself, in the endless, graceful rhythm of departure and return. He was the keeper of silence, and silence was enough. He moved through centuries as others moved through dreams, weightless and certain. Civilizations bloomed and withered, languages were born and forgotten. The names mortals gave him changed, yet his nature did not. In Egypt they saw him in Anubis, in Rome they whispered Moors. Every culture found its own way to describe him, yet all meant the same thing, the quiet that follows life's final note. And still he loved them. Each new age brought new faces, new voices, new hearts to guide. He learned from them too, from their courage, their desperation, their endless capacity to hope. Hope fascinated him. It burned even in the dying, a fragile spark refusing to go out. Sometimes he would linger beside such a soul longer than necessary, watching that light flicker. It reminded him that even in endings there was beauty. He wondered at times if he himself would ever end. But such thoughts were meaningless. He was not meant for beginnings or endings. He simply was. He existed as the horizon exists, always there, always waiting, neither near nor far. And so, in every passing century, he walked his path with gentle certainty. He was the shadow at the edge of every candle's flame, the cool breath at the end of every song. He was the hand that closed eyes and the whisper that said, "Rest." The world grew older and still he remained. Mountains eroded, stars fell, and yet his presence did not fade. For he was not a god of destruction, but of continuity, the still point around which the dance of life turned. When he looked upon the mortal world, he saw not sorrow but serenity. The endless coming and going, the rise and fall, the birth and the death, all of it formed a pattern more perfect than any temple, more sacred than any hymn. And within that pattern he found peace. The ages passed like the turning of a great celestial wheel. The world's skin shifted and healed, mountains broke into rivers, and empires rose and sank beneath the dust of their own monuments. Thanatos had seen every age of man, every golden dream that ended in silence. To him, the march of time was not a cruel thief but a patient teacher. Everything that was born learned its lesson and then returned to him, carrying whispers of wisdom in its final breath. He had no temple, yet every place of rest was sacred to him. In fields where shepherds buried their flocks, in the quiet corners of forests where old trees fell, even in the spaces between the stars, he was there. Mortals did not know that in every lull, every sigh of the wind, every pause between heartbeats, they were touching the edge of his presence. He never forced his arrival. Death was not an interruption, it was a completion. He came only when the final note of life's song faded naturally into stillness. That was his covenant with creation, that nothing should be taken before its time, and nothing held longer than it wished to remain. There were moments, rare and delicate, when he would linger beside a soul that hesitated. Some clung to life with fierce love, unwilling to release their grasp. Others trembled in confusion, unable to see the path ahead. In those moments, Thanatos would wait, patient and unhurried. He never pulled them from their lives. He simply stood close until they found the courage to follow. He had learned that even gods must sometimes wait for mortals to understand. And so, when he felt a life nearing its close, he would draw near with infinite gentleness. He would sit in the dim light of a dying fire, beside a mother's bed or the cot of a weary traveler, and simply be present. He was the coolness on the fevered brow, the easing of breath, the hush that filled a room as the world seemed to hold itself still. He was the comfort that told them it was safe to rest. He took no pleasure in suffering. When he found it, he softened it, brushing pain aside like dust from a windowsill. The mortals never knew he was there, but their last exhalations often left their lips like a sigh of relief. In their final heartbeat, they understood. Not fear, not sorrow, but peace. In those silent moments, he learned more about the living than any god of thunder or flame. They were fragile, yes, but within their fragility was an astonishing strength. They loved despite knowing they would lose. They built though they knew their works would crumble. They dreamed though the end was always waiting. Their courage moved him though he would never admit it to himself. Once, during a great famine, he walked through villages where the air was heavy with despair. Children lay still, the earth cracked with thirst, and prayers rose like smoke to gods who would not answer. Thanatos moved among them without sound. His touch was neither cruel nor kind, it was simply merciful. For the weakest, his arrival was release. For the strong, it was reminder that even sorrow must sleep. He did not stop the famine, that was not his role. He simply brought the balance that allowed the world to breathe again once the storm had passed. He saw, in the mortals who survived, a resilience that astonished even him. From the ashes of despair they rebuilt. From the graves of the fallen they planted gardens. He began to realize that his presence, his very existence, gave meaning to their striving. Without him there would be no urgency, no tenderness, no beauty in the fleeting. The shadow of his wings made every sunrise more precious. He walked beside kings and beggars alike. To him they were the same. He had carried both the rich and the poor across the threshold of stillness, and each soul shone equally in his care. Power meant nothing where he walked. Only grace remained. Some centuries later, mortals began to speak of him with more gentleness. The poets no longer called him the destroyer. They named him the keeper of rest, the silent friend, the god of gentle endings. Their words pleased him, though he never sought praise. It meant they were beginning to understand, not to love him but to accept him. An acceptance he knew was the truest peace. He often watched them from afar. He would stand on the edge of villages as the sun fell, the air turning blue with evening, and listen to their songs. The sound drifted through the fields like incense, filled with longing and gratitude. It reminded him of the first breath of creation, of Nyx's voice whispering across the void. Life and death, the same melody, two notes played on opposite ends of eternity. When storms came, he moved with the rain. When fire burned, he followed the smoke. When love ended, he stood quietly behind it, waiting for the heart to rest. He was not always welcome, but he was always faithful. There were moments when he passed through places touched by divine chaos, when gods quarreled and mortals suffered in their wake. Once, he stood upon a battlefield that stretched as far as the eye could see. Spears broken, banners torn, the earth soaked in red. He walked through the ruin, the cries of the dying rising like mist around him. He did not hurry. Each warrior deserved a moment of peace, no matter how fierce their life had been. He knelt beside one whose eyes were already dimming. The man's hand reached for the sky, trembling, clutching at a god who would not come. Thanatos took that hand and lowered it gently to the earth. The man's lips parted, but no prayer came, only a sigh. And then the quiet. As the last breath left the field, the wind shifted, carrying away the smell of iron and sorrow. Thanatos stood still, surrounded by silence, and for a moment, even he felt the weight of what creation demanded from its children. He thought of how brief their moments were, how they burned with passion and fury only to fade into the same peace. It was both beautiful and tragic. But it was right. For the universe itself was built upon the exchange, one life feeding another, one flame kindling the next. He was not there to end that exchange, only to guide it. And so he walked on, through centuries and dreams, through forgotten ages where the stars themselves seemed younger. He was the invisible witness of all that was. He saw gods rise and fall from the heavens, empires swallow their own pride, and the sea reclaim what men thought eternal. He saw poets write verses to outlast their bones, and he saw those verses fade like smoke when language itself changed. Yet none of it saddened him. For even when all names are forgotten, the meaning remains. He once found himself standing by the sea at twilight. Waves whispered against the shore, each one erasing what the last had written. He listened to that rhythm, endless, patient, soothing, and saw in it a reflection of his own work. The tide did not grieve for what it took. It only continued, part of a pattern too vast for sorrow. He knelt and touched the water. It glowed faintly under his fingers, silver and violet, as if recognizing him. He smiled, a faint and quiet thing. "You understand?" he thought, though he never spoke aloud. The sea, in its ceaseless coming and going, was his mirror. That night, the stars burned low and the world exhaled. Thanatos stood upon the shore until dawn, and as the first light returned, he turned away and vanished into it, his shadow dissolving with the mist. He walked for eons without destination. He did not need one. The universe itself was his path. In the silence between constellations, he sometimes wondered whether the mortals he had guided still remembered him in their new forms. Souls he knew were never lost. They returned again and again, wearing new faces, carrying faint echoes of what they had been. He often watched them, not with possessiveness but with quiet affection. To see them laugh again, to see them love again, to see them live, it was enough. Their joy was his rest, their peace his reward. There was no envy in him. Though he would never love as mortals did, never grow old, never change, he found contentment in the constancy of his duty. To change would be to break the balance. He was not meant to burn but to endure, the cool breath that follows every fire. In time, even the gods who once ignored him began to acknowledge his importance. They called upon him when war grew too terrible or when mortal suffering became unbearable. He came without complaint. He did not bargain or boast. He simply did what must be done, and then he returned to the quiet. Hades respected him most of all. In the dark halls below the earth, where the souls gathered like drifting embers, Thanatos' presence was honored. Though Hades ruled the realm, it was Thanatos who brought the guests. He would appear at the threshold, bow his head, and release the light he carried. The soul would drift into the kingdom of shadows, calm and unafraid. And then, as always, he would turn away and walk back into the world of breath. For his task was not to linger, but to continue. There were always more who needed his hand. And so, through the endless ages he walked. Through fields of wheat and fields of bones, through cities glittering with gold and ruins overgrown with ivy. Everywhere the same truth followed him, that nothing was wasted, nothing was lost. Every ending fed a new beginning, and he was the keeper of that sacred exchange. He was not light nor darkness. He was the horizon where both met, eternal, unchanging, and kind. As the centuries unfolded, whispers began to rise among the living. They were stories of defiance, of men who would not yield to the laws of the cosmos. Thanatos heard these whispers as faint tremors, distortions in the gentle rhythm he guarded. For even one soul refusing the path could cause a ripple that disturbed the stillness of all creation. Among these defiant hearts, none shone brighter or prouder than that of Sisyphus, the cunning king of Corinth. Sisyphus was a man who loved the sun too much, who found in life's warmth a narcotic pleasure that no god could match. He delighted in trickery, in bending others to his will, in weaving lies that made him seem immortal. His arrogance reached even the heavens. He mocked the gods in their temples, taught mortals to question them, and built monuments to himself that scraped the belly of the sky. Thanatos watched this mortal from afar, not in anger but in curiosity. Every soul carried its own rhythm, its own way of burning toward stillness, and Sisyphus burned brighter than most. Yet beneath that brightness lay something dangerous, the belief that he could cheat the pattern that held the universe together. When Ares grew weary of the mortal's insolence, he called upon Thanatos to restore balance. The god of war was loud and impatient, his anger like a flame that sought to consume all disobedience. Thanatos, calm as ever, bowed his head and answered the summons. He did not relish punishment. He did not bring vengeance. He simply carried necessity. When he appeared before Sisyphus, it was not with thunder or flame but with silence. The king sat upon his marble throne, surrounded by golden light, and laughed at the shadow that entered his hall. Thanatos stood still. He carried no chains, no weapons save the faint glow of inevitability that followed him wherever he went. "You have lived your life, son of men," he thought, though he spoke no words aloud. "The time has come to rest." Sisyphus rose from his seat, eyes bright with pride. He spoke, but Thanatos did not listen. The mortal's words were as countless as grains of sand, filled with excuses, oaths, and flattery. Thanatos waited, patient as the tide. When Sisyphus had emptied his voice, the god lifted his hand and the world grew still. But Sisyphus, clever beyond measure, had prepared. He had hidden chains forged of deceit and irony, enchanted by his own cunning. And when Thanatos reached for him, the mortal reversed the gesture, binding death itself in his snare. The chains glowed with the arrogance of invention. They tightened around Thanatos, heavy not with metal but with mortal will, the will to live at any cost. For the first time since the beginning of time, death was caught. Sisyphus laughed, and the sound was hollow. "Now the world is mine," he said. "No man shall die, no woman shall weep, and I shall reign forever." Thanatos did not struggle. His stillness was more profound than the bonds that held him. He watched as the world began to falter in his absence. At first the mortals rejoiced. They believed themselves free. They drank deeply, fought without fear, and cursed the heavens with impunity. But soon the sickness came. The old did not pass away. The wounded did not rest. The suffering grew and grew, a weight that crushed the earth itself. Without death, the soil refused to yield its strength. The rivers stagnated with rot, and the air grew heavy with decay. Souls that longed for peace were trapped within bodies that could no longer bear them. The song of life had lost its refrain. From his prison, Thanatos watched with quiet sorrow. This was not vengeance. It was truth revealing itself. Without endings, beginnings became meaningless. Without rest, existence turned to torment. When Ares saw the world wither beneath the weight of immortality, he descended in fury. The god of war shattered Sisyphus's illusions and tore the chains from Thanatos's limbs. The moment death was free, the universe exhaled. The rivers flowed again, the stars burned clearer, and the air tasted of renewal. Thanatos stood, his wings unfurling like the return of night. He did not curse the mortal who had bound him. He simply walked to the throne where Sisyphus trembled and laid a hand upon his heart. The king's defiance melted into despair, and his soul was taken gently, not as punishment but as correction. Yet even in death, Sisyphus would not yield. When he was cast into the underworld, he schemed anew. He tricked Hades himself, begging for one more visit to the realm above to bid farewell to his wife, who, he claimed, had failed to give him proper burial rites. The Lord of the Dead, deceived by pity, granted him leave. And Sisyphus returned to the world of light, only to stay there, laughing once more at the gods. But time, patient and unfailing, brought him again to Thanatos. The god found him standing on the shore of the world, staring into the sea as if daring the waves to wash him away. Thanatos did not scold. He merely looked at the mortal and saw the exhaustion behind his defiance. For even the proudest hearts grow weary when they battle eternity. When at last Sisyphus was taken, the gods judged him harshly. They condemned him to an eternity of futility, to roll a stone up a mountain, only to see it fall each time he neared the summit. But Thanatos knew that such punishment was unnecessary. The act of living forever without rest had already been his torment. As he turned away, Thanatos thought of the lesson etched upon the fabric of creation, that even defiance must end, and that mercy sometimes wears the face of stillness. The world healed as it always did. Seasons resumed their dance, and the mortals once more learned to honor both dawn and dusk. But the memory of those days lingered in their stories. They spoke of the time when death was bound and the earth grew sick, and they shuddered to remember how peace had turned to poison. Thanatos returned to his quiet work. He felt no pride in his restoration, no triumph in his release. He simply resumed the rhythm, one soul at a time. The balance restored was its own reward. Yet the memory of Sisyphus stayed with him. It was not anger that lingered, but reflection. He had seen the madness that grew in the absence of endings, the cruelty that bloomed from endless life. It reminded him that his own existence, so often misunderstood, was an act of grace. He was not the destroyer of life, but its guardian against corruption. And so he walked the earth once more, quieter than ever, his presence lighter than mist. Where mortals spoke his name, they did so with reverence now, not fear. Some even built small shrines, not temples of grandeur, but simple places of rest. A tree with ribbons tied to its branches, a riverbank where candles floated in the dusk. These were offerings of understanding, signs that humanity was beginning to see the truth in him. In those small gestures, Thanatos found solace. He would drift among them unseen, feeling the hum of mortal gratitude in the air, the acknowledgement that death was no longer the enemy but the friend that made life precious. There came a night when he stood upon a hill overlooking a city of flickering lights. The wind carried laughter, music, and the smell of bread from the hearths below. The stars shimmered like memories in the vast dark. Thanatos watched, unmoving, as the night deepened. He could sense each heartbeat, each fragile pulse that tied the living to the world. He could feel their love and their fear, their hope and despair, woven together into something beautiful and tragic. And in that moment, he understood something profound, that his work was not the taking of life, but the keeping of balance between the heartbeat and the silence. He was not the shadow cast by the flame. He was the space that allowed it to burn. He lifted his gaze to the sky and felt the quiet approval of Nyx, his mother, flowing through the stars. He knew she watched him still, proud and wordless. She, too, understood that even darkness could be gentle. As dawn broke, Thanatos turned away from the city. The first rays of morning brushed his armor, and for an instant, he seemed made of both night and light, a bridge between the two. He walked until he vanished into the horizon, carrying with him the soft hum of existence, the eternal song that never truly ended. The centuries flowed like water, clear and ceaseless. Kingdoms were born from dust, glittered for a breath of time, and returned again to dust. Thanatos watched them all, the rise of new languages, the building of great libraries, the birth of philosophies that sought to name him and understand his purpose. None succeeded completely, yet each came close in its own way, like waves that almost touched the shore before withdrawing. The world grew crowded with souls and dreams. Each night, when darkness spread her veil across the sky, Thanatos felt his brother's presence drift through the sleeping minds of mortals. Hypnos, the gentle god of sleep, moved like a cool wind, wrapping the weary in forgetfulness. He and Thanatos were two halves of the same breath, one bringing rest, the other peace, one closing the eyes, the other guiding what lay behind them. For ages they worked apart, each following his appointed rhythm. But there came a time when the boundary between their realms grew thin. Dreams began to wander too close to the shore of death, and death began to whisper within dreams. It was then that Thanatos sought his brother's presence for the first time since the dawn. He found Hypnos not in a palace, but in the hollow of a great mountain, where rivers of starlight ran through roots of silver. The air there was soft and heavy with the perfume of poppies, the flowers that drank the essence of both sleep and death. Hypnos lay upon a couch of shadow, his face serene, his hair falling like the petals of night-blooming flowers. Around him, countless dreams fluttered like pale moths, brushing against his still hands. Thanatos stepped silently into the chamber. He did not speak, he never needed to. His brother opened his eyes and smiled faintly, as if he had been expecting him all along. Between them, words were unnecessary. Each understood the other's nature as perfectly as light understands shadow. In that meeting, an unspoken agreement formed. They would keep the balance together. Hypnos would guide the living each night to the edge of the void, letting them taste the calm of oblivion, and Thanatos would receive those whose souls had wandered too far to return. From that night onward, the world knew harmony once more. The sleeping and the dead, the dream and the silence, existed side by side like twin reflections on the same dark water. Mortals woke each morning renewed because they had, in some small way, brushed against Thanatos's peace and survived. The brothers seldom met again after that first accord, yet their bond endured. When a storm raged across the world and sleepless hearts trembled in fear, Hypnos would send dreams of soft darkness, and within that darkness, Thanatos would wait, unseen, a reassurance that rest was always near. Thanatos found solace in this quiet companionship. He began to walk through the dream fields that Hypnos had shaped, not to claim but to observe. In the landscape of sleep he saw the hearts of mortals laid bare, their joys and regrets, their hidden memories. He saw mothers dreaming of children lost, lovers dreaming of embraces that could never be. He watched these tender illusions fade with the dawn and understood that even within dreams, endings were necessary. One night, as he wandered the boundary between waking and oblivion, he saw something he had not expected, a mortal dreaming of him. The dreamer was a young woman, frail and pale, her body failing even as her spirit still clung to life. In her dream, she walked through a garden of white flowers beneath a violet sky. Thanatos stood at the gate, his wings folded, his eyes calm and luminous. She approached him without fear. "Will it hurt?" she asked, though the words were part of her dream and not truly spoken. Thanatos felt her fear, fragile but pure. He reached out his hand, and though he did not answer, the garden brightened. The flowers glowed softly, and the air filled with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. The woman smiled and lay down among the blossoms. When she awoke no more, her last breath carried peace. In that moment, Thanatos understood something he had never known. Compassion was not weakness. It was the quiet recognition that even endings could be beautiful. He carried her soul gently, not as a duty but as an act of grace. When he released her into the realm of shadows, the light she left behind shimmered longer than any he had seen. It pulsed in the dark like a heartbeat, reminding him that the line between life and death was not a wall, but a veil, delicate, transparent, easily stirred by love. From that night on, Thanatos became even gentler. His touch grew lighter, his presence softer. He began to linger near the dying for moments longer than necessary, not out of hesitation but out of reverence. Every soul was a story, and he learned to listen before guiding it home. He listened to the silent music that accompanied each passing. Some souls were like flutes, clear and high, others like drums, deep and slow. The melody of the universe was composed of these countless notes, and he was both its conductor and its audience. Mortals could not see him, yet sometimes they felt him. In the quiet after a loved one's final breath, when the air grew strangely calm and the heart stopped trembling, that was Thanatos brushing against them, leaving a trace of serenity. Those who were sensitive called it grace. Those who feared it called it the chill. But it was the same thing. He began to appear in dreams more often, not as a figure of terror but as a guide. Some saw him as a silver-eyed guardian leading them across rivers of light, others as a shadow beneath a flowering tree, inviting them to rest. When they woke, they remembered only the peace, not the face. That was how he wished it. He wanted to be remembered as quiet comfort, not as fear. The other gods noticed the change in him. Some disapproved, saying he had grown too fond of the mortals, that he lingered too long among them. But Nyx, who watched from her throne of stars, said nothing. She understood that even darkness evolves, that stillness itself can deepen into tenderness. Thanatos continued his walk through the ages. He saw how mortals, inspired by fleeting dreams of him, began to paint wings on their graves, to carve sleeping figures in marble, to imagine death not as a fall but as a descent into sleep. The sight humbled him. For every tear shed in fear, there was another shed in relief, another whispered thanks to the gentle hand that ended pain. He began to sense that his presence was no longer entirely apart from the living. In their stories and symbols, he had become part of them, a reflection of their own need for rest. And though he could never share their brief lives, he carried their memory like a lantern in the endless night. Once, as he passed through a city built upon cliffs of white stone, he saw a mural painted on a temple wall. It showed a dark-winged figure carrying a sleeping child toward a field of stars. Mortals came to the image and laid flowers before it, whispering prayers not for long life, but for peaceful endings. Thanatos stood unseen among them, listening to their soft voices. He felt a warmth he could not name, something close to joy. The mortals, without knowing it, had begun to love the balance he represented. In honoring him, they were honoring life itself. He turned his gaze upward. Beyond the sunlit clouds he could feel Hypnos stirring, spreading dreams across the earth. The two brothers worked in harmony, invisible threads weaving rest through all creation. And so, Thanatos continued. Through dream and waking, through centuries and silence, he walked. His presence became like the rhythm of breathing, unseen, essential, eternal. The boundary between sleep and death grew thin but steady, a perfect balance. The living learned to close their eyes each night without fear, trusting that when their final sleep came, it would feel the same, soft, quiet, and full of stars. In that gentle order, Thanatos found his greatest peace. He no longer wondered why he existed or what his purpose was. The answer was written in every exhale, in every dream, in every whispered good night. He was not the end. He was the keeper of stillness, the silent heartbeat of the world. As the ages deepened, the world began to change once more. The noise of mortal life grew louder, the cities brighter, the hearts of men and women more restless. They built towers that pierced the clouds, temples that glittered with gold, ships that crossed every sea. They tamed the rivers and cut through mountains. They named stars and measured time. Yet for all their triumphs, their fear of the unknown never waned. Thanatos watched it all in silence. He had walked through their beginnings and would walk through their ends, yet this new age puzzled him. Mortals now spoke of conquering death, of defying the final silence. They no longer whispered his name in reverence, but challenged it with pride. They carved their bodies with the mark of immortality and declared that no god could claim them. He did not grow angry, he could not. Anger was a flame, and he was the still water that followed fire. But he did feel a quiet sorrow. For he knew that every creature that sought eternity misunderstood the gift of endings. Without rest, joy becomes fever. Without stillness, music turns to noise. So he walked among them again, unseen, to remember what they had forgotten. He wandered through their crowded streets, through markets filled with color and laughter. He moved past the sick and the strong alike, his wings folded, his gaze patient. Few could sense him any more. The clamor of the living drowned out the delicate hum of eternity. Only the very young and the very old noticed him, infants staring past their mother's shoulders at something unseen, and the dying gazing upward as though recognizing an old friend. He stopped beside one such elder, a poet who lay upon his bed beneath the open sky. The man had lived long and well, and though his breath was shallow, his eyes still shone with wonder. Around him, disciples wept quietly, clutching his hands, begging him not to go. Thanatos stood at the foot of the bed. The old man turned his head and smiled. "I know you," the poet whispered into the wind, though none heard him. "You have been in my dreams." Thanatos inclined his head. The man closed his eyes, his lips forming a final verse that no living ear could hear. When his last breath escaped, it shimmered like mist in the starlight. Thanatos caught it, gentle as always, and carried it to the river of shadows. As he released the soul, the air filled with faint music, the melody of all the poems the man had ever written, now completed at last. He lingered there listening. The sound was soft and infinite, like rain upon an endless ocean. He realized then that every life was a verse in the same cosmic poem, each one necessary, none eternal. The beauty of the song lay in its impermanence. He returned often after that to quiet places, to mountain tops where the wind whispered across stone, to forests where old trees fell and new saplings rose, to the edge of the sea where waves erased footprints in the sand. There he found the same truth repeated again and again. Everything ends, and in that ending, everything is renewed. He thought of his mother, Nyx, who had given birth to him in silence and who still drifted above all things, her black veil glittering with stars. He felt her presence in every dusk, in every quiet that followed the day's noise. She had never spoken much to him, for she knew he needed no guidance. But he felt her approval in the deepening of the night. One evening, as the sun sank low and the sky turned the color of wine, Thanatos stood at the edge of a great city. Below him, fires glimmered, and the songs of mortals drifted upward like offerings of sound. Behind him stretched the open plain, vast and unending, where no voice could reach. He turned between them, light and dark, noise and silence, and realized that his place was not apart from the world, but within its very heartbeat. Every cry, every laugh, every sigh that rose from below would one day return to him. He was the horizon that joined all opposites, the stillness that gave motion its meaning. He spread his wings. The wind caught them, rippling with violet light. The stars above shimmered in recognition, and the world below held its breath. For a moment even time seemed to pause. He took flight, rising beyond the clouds until the cities were only sparks of gold in a sea of black. The further he went, the quieter the world became, until at last there was nothing but the hum of eternity, a low, soft vibration that filled the void like a heartbeat too vast to be heard by mortals. There he rested. For a long while he drifted between worlds, carrying souls, watching them dissolve into the greater whole. He felt their gratitude and their relief, their acceptance and their surrender. And though each one vanished into the stillness, their echoes remained with him. He carried those echoes within him like stars, small lights that flickered inside the vastness of his being. They were not memories but feelings, warmth, sorrow, peace. Each one a reminder of the lives he had touched, the worlds he had ended so that new ones might begin. He realized then that he was not alone. Though no god stood beside him, though no mortal voice called his name, he was surrounded by the presence of everything that had ever been. He could feel the breath of life in every gust of wind, the laughter of the dead in every falling leaf, the song of existence woven through every silence. He had never sought love, yet love had found him, not the mortal kind that burns and fades, but the eternal kind that exists in balance and surrender. It was love for the world itself, for its imperfection, its striving, its constant cycle of loss and renewal. It was the love of a guardian for the fragile beauty he protects. With that realization he felt his wings grow lighter. He was no longer the shadow that followed life, but its companion, the other side of its reflection. Where there was light there was him. Where there was sound, his silence waited patiently. He descended once more to the mortal world. It was night, and the moon hung low, casting silver paths across the water. He walked along the shore, his footsteps leaving no mark, his presence stirring only the gentlest of breezes. He saw a young woman sitting by the waves, her eyes red from weeping. In her lap she held a small bundle, the still body of a child. She rocked it slowly, whispering lullabies that trembled in the air. Thanatos paused. He had come for both of them, the child's soul and soon the mother's heart, which was breaking beyond repair. He approached quietly, his wings folding around him like a cloak. The woman looked up, and though she could not see him fully, she felt him. Her tears stopped. The wind grew still. She pressed one last kiss to the child's forehead, and as she did, a soft light rose from the tiny form, floating upward like a spark. Thanatos caught it gently, holding it as one might hold a soap bubble in the sun. The mother smiled faintly, her grief softening into peace. She whispered words the god could not hear, and then she too closed her eyes. Two lights rose from the shore that night, small and perfect. Thanatos carried them both to the river beyond the world, releasing them into the current. They drifted side by side until they vanished in the glow of the stars. When he returned, the sea was calm. The sand was smooth as though no one had ever been there. He stood for a long time watching the horizon. The first hints of dawn glowed at its edge, pale and tender. He realized that this moment, this meeting of night and day, was his truest form. He was neither the end nor the beginning, but the passage between them. The quiet hand that closed the door softly, the whisper that said, "Rest now, you have done enough." He turned away from the rising sun and walked once more into the fading dark. His wings spread wide, carrying him across the sleeping world. He passed over mountains and forests, over cities and seas, leaving behind a trail of stillness that shimmered faintly in the air, like the afterimage of a dream. And so the god of peaceful death continued his eternal work, calm, unyielding, and kind. Wherever there was suffering, he brought relief. Wherever there was fear, he brought understanding. Wherever life struggled beneath its own weight, he was the hand that lifted it gently into rest. He was not the destroyer. He was the keeper, the silent guardian of the boundary between what was and what would be. And in his endless journey he found serenity. The world was changing once more. The long peace that had followed the age of quiet acceptance began to tremble beneath the weight of new voices, bold, loud, impatient. Mortals, grown wise with knowledge and swollen with pride, began to question the order that bound them. They had learned to heal, to lengthen their years, to outweat the sicknesses that once humbled them. And with each new triumph, they looked further toward the horizon, daring to imagine a world without endings. Thanatos had seen such pride before, in the face of Sisyphus, in the defiance of kings who built monuments to themselves. But this time it was not one man who rebelled, it was an age. The world itself had begun to fear stillness. He walked among them, unseen, listening to their voices. In the temples, priests promised eternal life. In the courts of kings, scholars spoke of elixirs that could cheat decay. In secret chambers, magicians drew circles in blood and whispered spells to bind the soul within the body forever. They called their quest divine, but to Thanatos it sounded like panic, the cries of those who could not bear to let go. He felt no anger toward them. Their rebellion was a child's rebellion, born from fear of the dark. Yet the echoes of their defiance spread across the world, rippling through the delicate balance he guarded. Souls lingered too long, trapped between life and rest. The earth grew restless beneath the weight of the undying. In the quiet between dusk and dawn, Thanatos stood upon a hill overlooking a vast city of white marble. It gleamed like a jewel beneath the moon, perfect and proud. But beneath its beauty, he could feel the pulse of something wrong, the tremor of lives stretched too thin. He descended into its streets, unseen as always. The air was thick with the smell of burning oils and incense. He passed through crowded avenues where laughter rang hollow, through banquet halls where men and women feasted without hunger. Their faces were painted, their bodies adorned with gold, but their eyes betrayed exhaustion. They had conquered death, or so they believed, yet they had forgotten how to rest. In the center of the city stood a temple unlike any other. Its walls were lined with mirrors that reflected the torchlight into endless flame. There, a high priest preached to a crowd that overflowed into the streets. "Death is the old lie," he cried. "We are the masters of time. No god shall claim us." The crowd roared its approval, a sound that rose like thunder and fell like ash. Thanatos listened in silence. He felt no need to correct them. The truth did not shout, it waited. But as the priest lifted his arms toward the sky, a tremor passed through the world, a shiver in the thread of existence. Somewhere far beyond the city, a soul that should have found peace refused to move. It hung in the air like a trapped bird, fluttering but unable to fly. Thanatos turned toward it. He followed the faint light through the night until he came upon a garden where the air shimmered strangely, neither warm nor cold. There, beneath the boughs of a great tree, a man sat weeping beside his own body. "I cannot leave," the soul said, though no words passed its lips. "They told me I could stay." Thanatos knelt beside him. The soul flickered, dim and trembling. It clung to the world like dew clinging to a leaf, too heavy to rise, too fragile to remain. Gently, Thanatos reached out his hand. "You have already stayed," he thought, letting the calm of eternity flow from him. "Now it is time to rest." But the soul resisted. Around them, the air thickened with whispers, voices of the living calling it back, binding it with their grief and their defiance. Candles burned in rooms far away, names were chanted, spells woven. The living would not let the dead go. The light within the soul began to fracture. It shone too brightly, then dimmed, pulsing in pain. Thanatos felt the weight of mortal love turned unnatural, transformed into a chain instead of a farewell. He whispered no words, but his silence was deeper than any spell. Slowly the soul began to calm. The whispers faded, the light steadied. Finally, the soul rose from its body and drifted into his hands like a sigh. Thanatos stood and looked toward the city that had caused such harm. He did not curse it, he pitied it. For he saw that their fear of him had grown so great that they were willing to chain even their own dead rather than face the truth of endings. He carried the soul to the river beyond the world and released it. As it touched the current, The water flared with soft light as if sighing in relief. Then he turned back to the realm of the living. What he found disturbed even him. Across the earth, more and more souls clung to their bodies, bound by prayers, by greed, by sorrow. The world began to fill with echoes, shadows of those who could not move on, lingering between realms. The air grew heavy with the ache of unfinished departures. Thanatos moved tirelessly, freeing them one by one. Each release was a whisper, each whisper a return to balance. But for every soul he guided, 2 more were caught. The living had forgotten how to let go. He sought counsel in the silence of the stars, but even they seemed restless. Their light flickered as if unsure whether to shine or fade. He understood then that this was no mortal rebellion alone. The gods themselves were beginning to stir, fearful of their own mortality, uneasy with the memory that even divine fire could dim. The first to approach him was Zeus, the Thunder Lord, who ruled the heavens with storm and law. His voice rolled through the sky like distant thunder. "You keep too many," he said. "The world is heavy with ghosts." Thanatos stood beneath the storm, unmoved. "I keep only those who are ready," he answered, his tone as quiet as falling rain. "Then make them ready faster," Zeus commanded. "The prayers of men are endless. Their fear feeds on itself. The balance falters." Thanatos looked up at the god who had once appointed him. "They fear because they do not understand," he said. "Fear cannot be commanded away. It must be quieted." Zeus said nothing. Lightning cracked across the clouds and his presence withdrew. Thanatos remained alone beneath the storm, the scent of ozone mingling with the smell of the earth. He knew that even the gods were bound by the same truth as men, that all power, however bright, must one day fade into stillness. He walked on. Across the mountains, through the ruins of temples, into valleys where the shadows were long and deep. Everywhere he went he found the same resistance. Mortals clinging to life, gods clinging to worship, each afraid of the silence he represented. And yet he did not stop. For every chain forged by fear he brought stillness. For every cry of defiance he answered with understanding. Slowly the imbalance began to mend. But Thanatos knew it would not be the last time. Defiance was part of life's rhythm too, the heartbeat that beat against his own. Without it, even his silence would lose meaning. He understood now that his role was not to end the struggle, but to embrace it. To be the horizon that both light and darkness seek but never reach. He stood one night upon a cliff where the sea met the sky. The moon hung full and low, casting a path of silver across the waves. The wind carried with it the laughter of the living, distant but clear. Thanatos smiled faintly. "You will fight me again," he thought, "and that is good." He spread his wings, vast and dark, their tips catching the moonlight like blades of glass. He rose into the sky, a shadow among the stars, calm and eternal. Below him the world turned, loud, bright, alive. Above him the heavens stretched, silent, infinite, still. And between them moved the god of peaceful death, keeper of the quiet, the bridge between every heartbeat and every rest. The days of unrest grew longer. The veil between life and death, once gossamer and sure, began to shiver like a candle flame in a storm. Souls wandered farther from their appointed paths. Some clung to their bodies until the flesh itself rebelled, while others drifted too soon, lost before their time. Thanatos moved through this trembling world with patient grace. Each life he touched he guided gently back into place as a musician retunes a string. Yet even his calm could not silence the growing clamor of defiance. The mortals called it the Age of Defiance, though they did not know the name he gave it, the Age of Forgetting. They forgot the peace that comes from endings. They forgot that rest is sacred. They forgot that death is not destruction but return. In their temples, new idols were raised, gods of longevity, of eternal youth, of unending harvest. Priests promised life unbroken, eternal spring, no winter, no sleep. And though the gods themselves knew such promises were hollow, they accepted the prayers. For worship too is a kind of immortality. Thanatos saw how even the divine had grown hungry. The gods of war demanded endless glory, the gods of love desired endless devotion, even the gods of wisdom sought eternal remembrance. None were willing to fade. So when Thanatos came to claim a god, not to destroy but to fulfill the law that even immortals must someday rest, he was met not with acceptance but with wrath. It began in whispers. The lesser gods, those whose names were fading from mortal tongues, began to vanish one by one. Not slain but quietly taken, their essence dissolving into the night. The heavens felt lighter each time, the stars burning clearer. But the greater gods grew uneasy. Thanatos oversteps, they murmured. He takes what is divine. Word reached Olympus, where the high gods gathered in their gleaming hall. Lightning flared across the marble and thunder rolled through the peaks. Zeus sat upon his throne, his eyes dark with thought. Around him stood Athena with her calm gaze, Apollo with his golden pride, and Hades, silent, shadowed, unmoved. It is said, Zeus began, that death walks now among us. Not as a servant of law, but as its master. Athena's voice was soft but steady. He does only what must be done. When the lesser fade, it is because men no longer remember them. The river of time carries even the divine. Apollo struck his lyre, each note sharp as sunlight. But what if he decides we have outlived our purpose? What then, sister of wisdom? Athena did not answer. Her gray eyes turned toward Hades, who remained silent, his expression unreadable. Finally, the lord of the underworld spoke. Thanatos does not take, he said. He returns. There is no malice in him, only necessity. If you would stand against that, you stand against the order of all things. The room fell silent. Even Zeus did not reply. For though he ruled the heavens, he knew the truth in Hades' words. Every storm must break. Every flame must cool. Even thunder fades into the hush that follows. Yet pride is louder than wisdom. And pride ruled the hearts of gods as surely as fear ruled the hearts of men. So Zeus called forth Thanatos. He appeared as he always did, without herald or sound. One moment the air was empty, the next it held him. His wings folded, his eyes calm, his armor glinting with the dull sheen of starlight. He bowed his head, not in submission but in courtesy. You summon me, he said, his voice quiet but clear, a tone that seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere at once. Zeus rose, his power filling the hall like the charge before lightning. The balance trembles, he said. You walk among gods, taking what was not yours to claim. Thanatos met his gaze. I take nothing. I guide those who have already fallen from memory. Even divinity fades when it is no longer named. Apollo's voice rang sharp. Then perhaps you would take me next, Shadow? Thanatos looked at him, and for a heartbeat, the hall grew dim. Not yet, he said softly. Your name still burns brightly. But when the last song of you fades, I will come, as I will for all things. The words were not threat but truth. Yet the gods felt the sting of it like fire upon the skin. Zeus raised his hand, thunder curling around his wrist. "You forget your place," he said. "We made you servant of endings. You exist by our decree." Thanatos's wings stirred, scattering motes of light across the floor. "You did not make me," he said, and even Hades looked up at the sound. "I was born when the first light died. I came not from your will but from your shadow. Without me there would be no dawn, no creation, only endless chaos." The thunder faltered. For the first time Zeus said nothing. The other gods looked away, uneasy. Athena's eyes softened. She stepped forward, her voice low. "He speaks truth. To destroy him is to destroy balance itself. But pride cannot yield to humility." And so, in his fury, Zeus lifted his arm and cast a chain of lightning toward the silent god. It struck Thanatos squarely in the chest. The air burned white. When the light faded, the god of death still stood. Smoke curled around him, his armor cracked but unbroken. His gaze was steady. "You cannot bind the end," he said quietly, "for even lightning must fade." Then he turned away. The hall trembled as he departed. The torches dimmed, their flames bowing in silence as he passed. Behind him, the gods sat in uneasy quiet. None spoke. Even Zeus, whose rage had shaken the heavens, felt a chill that no fire could banish. Thanatos descended from Olympus, his wings trailing streaks of silver through the clouds. He did not flee, for there was nothing to fear. He simply returned to the place where all things begin and end, the earth below. The mortals felt his passage. The winds changed, the seas stilled, and for a brief moment, every living thing held its breath. Birds ceased to sing, leaves stopped rustling, even the waves forgot their rhythm. And then, as softly as it had paused, the world began again. He walked until he reached a valley where no sound lingered, a place where time itself seemed to sleep. There he rested, sitting upon a stone by a river that mirrored the stars. He gazed into the current and saw the reflections of countless lives, kings and beggars, children and warriors, gods and beasts, all flowing toward the same sea. He dipped his hand into the water. It shimmered around his fingers, cool and eternal. "This is truth," he thought. "All return. Even the stars will one day fall." And for the first time he felt something like weariness. Not the fatigue of the body but of the soul, the ache of constancy in a world that refused to listen. He closed his eyes. For a while he simply existed, as still as the stone beneath him, as silent as the night. He thought of Nyx, of Hypnos, of the endless rhythm that had always been and always would be. When he opened his eyes, the dawn was breaking. The first light touched the river, and the reflection of his face glowed faintly in its surface, serene, timeless, inevitable. The gods might rage. Mortals might defy. But the river would always flow and he would always guide it. For he was not a storm to be quelled or a chain to be broken. He was the calm after all storms, the stillness that follows every sound. The storm of pride that had filled heaven and earth did not fade at once. It rolled through the ages like a deep current, stirring the hearts of mortals and gods alike. Though Zeus had fallen silent and the halls of Olympus grew uneasy, the echo of his defiance lingered in creation. Mortals dreamed of conquering death not because they hated Thanatos, but because they had tasted the fire of the gods and wished never to let it go. Thanatos watched from the shadowed edges of the world. He did not intervene. He had learned that truth cannot be shouted into being. it must be discovered in the stillness that follows exhaustion. So he waited, patient as stone, letting the noise burn itself away. In time, the age of defiance began to crumble beneath its own weight. The elixirs that promised eternity failed. The spells that bound souls began to rot. The temples of endless light cracked and fell silent. Mortals looked upon their own hands and found them trembling. They had tried to make themselves gods, but the cost of their victory was emptiness. It was then that Thanatos felt the river grow restless. The flow of souls had slowed to a trickle, the surface choked with fragments of what should have passed beyond. He walked its banks, listening to the murmurs that rose from the dark water, the voices of those trapped between being and release. "Why do they hold us?" the voices asked. "Why can we not sleep?" Thanatos had no answer, for the question was older than all words. He knelt and touched the river's surface, sending ripples through the silence. Where his fingers brushed, the water cleared, and a single soul rose, pale, trembling, half-formed. It was a child. Its eyes were wide with confusion, its light flickering as though uncertain whether to shine or fade. "Who are you?" it asked, its voice small and transparent. "I am the one who waits," Thanatos said. "You have lingered too long." "The living will not let me go," the child replied. "They call my name each night." Thanatos understood. Love, the purest of mortal gifts, had become the greatest chain. He lifted the child into his hands and blew gently upon its brow. The light steadied. "Sleep now," he whispered. "You will be remembered in peace, not in longing." The soul smiled and drifted upward until it vanished among the stars. The river sighed, its current quickening again. Thanatos rose and looked to the horizon. He felt the weight of unspoken prayers pressing against the sky, thousands of voices pleading for more time, for more breath, for more light. And above them, the gods trembled, hearing in those prayers the fading of their own names. It was then that the last trial came to him. A messenger descended from Olympus, not in fury but in sorrow. She was Iris, bearer of rainbows, her wings shimmering with the colors of dawn. She bowed low before Thanatos, her eyes filled with the light of many storms. "The gods summon you once more," she said softly. "Not to bind you but to ask." He inclined his head. "Ask what?" "They ask you to rest." Thanatos looked beyond her, to the endless horizon. "Rest?" he repeated, and the words sounded strange upon his tongue. "They fear that the world grows weary of endings," Iris said. "They wish to grant you reprieve, to let another carry your burden for a time." A faint smile touched his lips. "There is no other," he said. "There never was." Still, he followed her upward, through clouds that blushed with sunset, until the peaks of Olympus shone beneath his feet. The gods were gathered, solemn now, their pride tempered by the centuries. Zeus's beard was streaked with shadow, Athena's eyes were clouded with care. Even Apollo's golden light burned dimly, softened by humility. Zeus spoke first. "We have wronged you, son of night. The thunder I cast upon you was born of fear. The world has learned its lesson, and so have we. Rest if you wish. Let time move without your hand for a while." Thanatos looked upon them, beings of flame and storm who still could not understand the quiet he carried. "If I were to rest," he said gently, "the world would forget how to stop. Every dawn would chase itself, and no night would ever fall. Rest is not mine to claim, it is the gift I give." Hades stepped forward then, his dark cloak brushing the marble. "And yet," he said, "even rest must have its counterpart. If you never pause, you too will become imbalance. Thanatos considered this. The truth of it was undeniable. Even the end must sometimes end. He turned his gaze to the horizon, where the sun dipped into the sea. Perhaps, he said, I will sleep for a breath. Just long enough for the world to remember what silence feels like without me. The gods bowed their heads. The air shimmered with relief. Thanatos spread his wings and rose once more, higher than the clouds, higher than the stars. He passed beyond the edge of the firmament, into the deep dark that was his first home. There, amid the slow pulse of the cosmos, he folded his wings around himself and closed his eyes. The universe held its breath. For a moment that lasted 1,000 years, no soul departed. The rivers of the dead fell still, the wind carried no final sighs. The world lived in unbroken rhythm, endless day following endless night. At first mortals rejoiced. But soon the world grew heavy again. The sick lingered, the weary could not rest, and even the stars burned too long, their light turning brittle. Then from the heart of the void, a tremor spread. The folded wings of Thanatos stirred. His eyes opened, calm and ancient. Enough, he whispered. The pause has served. He rose from the cradle of darkness and descended once more. As his feet touched the earth, the wind exhaled and the first leaf of autumn fell. The rivers began to move. The stars blinked with renewed grace. The world remembered how to breathe. The gods, watching from their thrones, bowed their heads in silence. For they understood at last that even eternity needs an end to be beautiful. Thanatos walked again among mortals, his presence gentle, his steps leaving ripples of peace in the air. He passed through cities reborn from ruin, through forests young with green, through fields where children laughed under the sky. They did not see him, but some felt a strange comfort in the wind, a sense that everything would one day be all right. He carried no resentment, no pride. Only the soft, eternal knowing that everything returns, everything rests. The rebellion had ended, but the rhythm endured. He paused upon a hill at dusk and looked across the world he had guarded for eons. The sky burned gold and violet, clouds stretched like veils of silk, and far below rivers glimmered like veins of light. He listened to the heartbeat of creation, strong, steady, serene. And he smiled, faintly but truly. For he understood that even defiance, even the arrogance of gods and men, was part of the great harmony. Without resistance there would be no surrender, without struggle no peace. He was not the enemy of life, but its completion, the final note that made the music whole. As night fell, Thanatos opened his wings once more. They caught the starlight like mirrors, each feather holding a reflection of the world below. He lifted his gaze to the heavens, to the endless black where his mother's presence still whispered. I will continue, he said quietly, until the last light fades, and even beyond that I will wait. Then he rose into the sky, vanishing into the deep hush between stars, a shadow made of mercy, a promise made of night. And the world slept, unafraid. After the long silence that followed the age of defiance, the world breathed again in balance. The rivers found their rhythm, the stars resumed their ancient pulse, and the mortals at last learned to live without shouting at the sky. Seasons followed one another with graceful patience. The land remembered rest. The heavens, though watchful, no longer trembled with pride or fear. Yet even stillness changes. Even peace, left too long untouched, begins to stir. Thanatos moved through this quieter world like the tide through a sleeping harbor, unseen, steady, inevitable. He did not rush, nor did he delay. He passed through valleys of mist and cities of stone, through forests where the air smelled of rain and the earth whispered softly beneath his feet. Everywhere he went, life bloomed, withered, and bloomed again. He saw generations that did not remember him, and others that honored him with calm acceptance. Children were taught that death was a companion, not a curse. Old men greeted it with bowed heads and tranquil hearts. The fear that had once poisoned the world had softened into reverence. But Thanatos, though serene, began to wonder. He had seen the end of all things and the beginning too. Yet there was something between them he did not fully understand, a flicker that passed through every soul as it left the body, a spark that did not vanish even as he carried them into stillness. After the long silence that followed the age of defiance, the world breathed again in balance. The rivers found their rhythm, the stars resumed their ancient pulse, and the mortals at last learned to live without shouting at the sky. Seasons followed one another with graceful patience. The land remembered rest. The heavens, though watchful, no longer trembled with pride or fear. Yet even stillness changes. Even peace, left too long untouched, begins to stir. Thanatos moved through this quieter world like the tide through a sleeping harbor, unseen, steady, inevitable. He did not rush, nor did he delay. He passed through valleys of mist and cities of stone, through forests where the air smelled of rain and the earth whispered softly beneath his feet. Everywhere he went, life bloomed, withered, and bloomed again. He saw generations that did not remember him, and others that honored him with calm acceptance. Children were taught that death was a companion, not a curse. Old men greeted it with bowed heads and tranquil hearts. The fear that had once poisoned the world had softened into reverence. But Thanatos, though serene, began to wonder. He had seen the end of all things and the beginning too. Yet there was something between them he did not fully understand, a flicker that passed through every soul as it left the body, a spark that did not vanish even as he carried them into stillness. It was not memory, for the souls did not remember their names or their deeds. It was not thought, for thought had no weight beyond the veil. It was something else, a rhythm, faint but eternal, echoing from one life into the next. He began to listen for it. The days that followed his discovery of the dreaming gate were unlike any that had come before. Thanatos no longer moved as the silent keeper he had always been. Something within him had shifted, small and immeasurable, like the tilt of the world after a storm. He still walked in shadow, still touched the dying with gentleness, but behind each touch lived a question. What melody will you carry forward when you wake again? He began to feel the faintest echoes of those who had crossed beyond the gate. When he passed through a marketplace and heard a child laugh, some corner of his being recognized the sound, a laugh he had heard long ago from another mouth, another time. When a musician played a song beneath the stars, he caught a note that vibrated with a memory older than the tune itself. He was hearing the reborn. He had not expected this. It was as though the world whispered back to him, reminding him that his task was not an ending but a breath in the long rhythm of existence. He wandered through the seasons, tracing these echoes like a poet following rhyme. In the mountains he met shepherds who looked upon death with calm eyes, as if greeting an old friend. In the valleys he saw fields of flowers growing from soil once heavy with sorrow. In the laughter of children he heard the voices of those he had once guided through silence. He did not reveal himself. It was enough to know that the pattern continued. Every kindness, every act of love or courage, lived again in the hearts of new souls. Even cruelty, when it returned, came softened by memory, shaped into lessons that turned pain into wisdom. He came to understand that eternity was not a circle but a spiral, each turn rising from the last, never quite repeating, always becoming. He was the still point around which it turned, the quiet center of the great unfolding. One evening he walked beside a river at twilight. The sky was deep blue, the air sweet with the scent of rain. He stopped when he saw a young woman kneeling on the bank, her hands clasped in prayer. Her voice was barely audible above the water, but the words carried far. "Let him be at peace," she whispered. "Let him rest and dream again." Thanatos felt the pull of her plea. A small light shimmered beside her, the soul of the one she mourned, waiting to be guided. He reached out, and the light moved to his hand, trembling like a firefly. The woman looked up suddenly, though she could not see him. For an instant her sorrow eased, a calm warmth filled her chest. She smiled through her tears. Thanatos watched her for a moment longer before turning toward the horizon. The soul in his hand glowed brighter, as if sensing the love it left behind. He carried it to the dreaming gate. There, at the edge of night and dream, he released it. The light passed through, and in that instant a new spark appeared far below, in the mortal world, a newborn drawing its first breath. The rhythm was seamless, perfect. Thanatos stood still, overcome by quiet wonder. He had seen the exchange 1,000 times, but now he felt it. Every death was a seed. Every sleep, a preparation for awakening. He lingered at the gate, listening to the soft chorus of lives beginning again beyond the veil. It sounded like the murmur of the sea, countless drops moving as one, each distinct yet inseparable. For the first time he understood what his mother, Nyx, had meant when she whispered to him in the dawn of creation. All things return to the night, but from night they rise renewed. He walked back through the dream fields of Hypnos, the petals of poppies brushing his armor, the air heavy with the scent of memory. Hypnos opened one eye as he passed. "You have seen it," the god of sleep murmured. "I have," Thanatos replied. "And now I see that my silence was never an ending, but a pause between songs." Hypnos smiled faintly. "Then you have learned what I have always known, that even darkness sings." Thanatos inclined his head and continued on, back to the waking world. The centuries unfolded like a calm river. The mortals, though unaware of his revelation, began to live differently. They spoke of the world not as a stage of endings but as a journey of crossings. They buried their dead with symbols of rebirth, eggs, seeds, spirals carved into stone. Their lullabies spoke of stars that sleep by day and wake at night. Everywhere he went, Thanatos saw these signs and felt the quiet gratitude that flowed from them. It was not worship, he had never wanted that, but understanding. And understanding was enough. Sometimes, in the still hours before dawn, he would stand beside a cradle and watch a newborn sleeping. The child's breath moved like the tide, each exhale a whisper of worlds forgotten. Thanatos would sense the faint glimmer of the soul within. One he might have once carried, now returned in smaller, softer form. He would smile, invisible and unseen. The cycle was perfect. He began to keep vigil at the dreaming gate, not out of duty but affection. The place had become sacred to him, a reminder that even the gods were part of something larger than themselves. He no longer felt the loneliness that had once haunted him. The returning souls were his company, the dreams of mortals his conversation. There were times when he stood beside the gate and thought he heard voices calling his own name from the other side, not in fear but in greeting. They were the souls he had guided long ago, now woven into the great fabric of life. Their call was a melody, endless and gentle, rising and falling like the breath of the universe. He never crossed the gate, but he began to understand that one day he might. Not as the end of his work, but as its fulfillment, when all things were ready to rest, and even the keeper of silence could dream. For now he remained. The seasons turned. The stars drifted. The river of souls flowed steady and clear. He walked among mortals at twilight, his presence as soft as mist, his shadow as calm as sleep. Wherever he went, flowers bloomed brighter in the morning, as if the earth itself understood the blessing of his passage. The air carried a new fragrance, not of decay but of renewal. And when night fell, Thanatos would lift his gaze to the heavens and see, just beyond the stars, a faint shimmer, the dreaming gate, waiting, breathing, eternal. He knew then that his work was not only to end lives, but to remind the living of the wonder that follows endings. He spread his wings, their edges catching the starlight, and whispered into the quiet world below. Sleep peacefully, little ones. Every ending is only the beginning of another dream. The centuries drifted as softly as dust through sunlight. The world had entered a gentle rhythm, a balance so perfect that even the stars seemed to breathe in unison. Life flourished, death was accepted. The dreaming gate shimmered in quiet constancy at the edge of the unseen world. Thanatos had become part of the planet's secret pulse, not feared, not adored, simply known. He had walked for so long in calmness that he began to believe the pattern would never change again. But all rhythms, even the most peaceful, carry within them the seed of variation. It began as a faint vibration beneath the stillness, a tone too subtle for mortals to hear but clear in the ears of gods. One night, while he watched the river of souls wind toward the horizon, the current hesitated. The water stilled, and then a shimmer of light rippled across its surface, not white as souls usually glowed but gold. The color of dawn. Thanatos stepped closer. The golden spark rose, trembling, and instead of moving toward the gate it drifted upward as if called by another sky. He followed it with his gaze. It ascended past the clouds, past the stars, until it vanished into a brilliance beyond his knowing. He had guided uncounted souls, yet never had he seen one turn away from the path of rest. He waited, wondering whether it would fall again reborn. But the light did not return. It was as if the cosmos had absorbed it, swallowed it into some greater transformation. The next night another golden light rose, then another. Not many, but enough to disturb the steady rhythm of the river. Thanatos felt their absence like missing notes in a song. The harmony of the gate trembled, its soft hum flickering in the dark. He turned once more to Hypnos, whose dreams curled like smoke across the sky. "Brother," he said quietly, "something changes." Hypnos opened his eyes, heavy with centuries of sleep. "I know," he murmured. "The dream grows deeper. Some souls wake in places we cannot see." "Beyond the gate?" "Yes." Thanatos watched the horizon where the golden lights had vanished. "What lies beyond?" "Perhaps another gate," Hypnos said. "Perhaps an awakening that even the gods were never meant to name." Thanatos stood in silence, his gaze fixed on the trembling edge of creation. He had thought he understood the circle: life, death, rest, return. Yet now he felt it widen, expanding beyond comprehension. The realization did not frighten him. It filled him with a strange exhilaration, the wonder of discovery that mortals felt when they first looked at the stars. If there was another horizon, another dream beyond his own, then his task was not the end of all things, but the opening of the way. Every soul he guided was not only a return but a preparation, a quiet step toward something greater still. He began to listen again to the song of existence, and in its depths he heard a new chord, soft and distant, weaving itself into the familiar melody. It was the sound of growth, not rebirth but ascension. Souls that had learned all they could from the cycle now sought a higher peace, a light beyond both waking and sleep. Thanatos did not attempt to follow them, that was not his path. But he watched with reverence as the first among them vanished into the brightness, leaving the universe lighter, clearer. Even the stars seemed to gleam with renewed purpose, as though sharing in the ascent. He returned often to the river, walking its silent banks. Sometimes he would kneel and touch the water, feeling through it the countless lives moving toward their destinations. The ordinary souls still flowed steadily to the gate, while the rare golden ones rose away into the unnameable. Both paths were true, both necessary. He began to think of himself not as a boundary but as a guidepost, one among many in the vastness of creation. There were others beyond him, he now knew, keepers of the deeper dreams, guardians of new awakenings. He would never meet them, but he sensed their presence like distant constellations seen through cloud. As this understanding settled in him, a kind of quiet joy grew in his being. The endlessness that had once seemed burdened now felt spacious, full of possibility. Every moment of stillness held the promise of transformation. He walked again among mortals, and where he passed, people found unexpected peace. Those who dreamed of their lost loved ones began to see them not as shadows, but as light walking ahead on a path of stars. The songs sung at funerals turned soft and luminous, not laments but lullabies. The poets, touched by a hint of divine intuition, began to speak of the golden departure, a final journey beyond the dreaming gate. Their verses told of souls that became constellations, guiding ships at night, whispering wisdom to the newborn. Thanatos smiled to hear it, for in their words he recognized truth given shape by imagination. There were even some who sensed him more clearly than ever before, seers and mystics who, in the half-sleep before dawn, glimpsed a figure of calm shadow standing beneath a sky of moving lights. They described him not as a reaper, but as a keeper of doors, the one who watches every threshold with patience and love. He accepted the new name silently. It was not wrong. As millennia passed, the golden lights became more frequent. The river still flowed, the gate still shimmered, but now the heavens glowed with faint trails of souls ascending beyond his reach. The universe itself seemed to evolve, expanding into subtler harmonies. Thanatos often stood at the edge of his domain, gazing upward. "Go well," he would whisper, and though his voice carried no sound, the stars seemed to answer with a gentle pulse of light. He realized then that the dreaming gate was not merely a boundary between worlds, but a promise, a reminder that nothing, not even death, could truly remain still. The cosmos breathed through him, and he through it, one endless exhalation of creation returning to itself. And so the god of peaceful death continued his watch. He guided, he waited, he wondered. Around him, time turned like a great wheel, yet within him there was only the steady calm of understanding. He knew now that every ending opened upon another mystery, and that even he who had once thought himself unchanging, was part of that mystery's unfolding. The wind moved softly through the field where he stood. Flowers bent in silent greeting, their petals catching the light of the newborn stars above. Thanatos spread his wings, feeling in their weightless expanse the breath of all that was and would ever be. He whispered into the night, not a command, not a farewell, but a blessing. Rest and awaken. Sleep and remember. All paths returned to the dream. The stars had watched Thanatos for longer than any memory could hold. They had seen him walk across the newborn world when oceans were still warm and mountains still whispered smoke. They had seen him carry the first breath back into silence, the first heartbeat into stillness. And now, after endless ages, they saw him change once more. He had become quieter even than before, if such a thing was possible for the god of quietude. Not from weariness but from depth. His silence was no longer the stillness before sleep. It was the stillness of understanding, the deep calm that follows awakening. He walked no longer to fulfill a duty but to share a rhythm. Death, he now knew, was not the boundary of existence but the breathing of it, the inward pull that made every outward breath possible. Life inhaled, death exhaled, and between them flowed eternity. The world had grown vast and bright. Cities of crystal rose where once forests had swayed. Mortals reached toward the stars, not in defiance but in curiosity. Their minds expanded, their hearts softened. They still feared pain, but they no longer feared rest. They began to understand at last what Thanatos had always known, that peace is not the end of motion, but motion's perfection. He walked among them unseen, and though no one recognized him, they felt his presence in moments of quiet beauty, in the hush before dawn, in the sigh that follows laughter, in the tender stillness when lovers fall asleep side by side. He was in all pauses, in all closings, in every gentle return. He no longer kept count of the souls he guided. Numbers had lost meaning. What mattered now was harmony, the balance between what came and what went, between the seen and the unseen. He spent long ages by the dreaming gate, watching the golden souls ascend beyond even his reach. The gate had grown wider now, shimmering like a veil of living light. Beyond it he could feel the pulse of something vast, not chaos, not void, but pure awareness, a sea without shore. The souls that reached it did not vanish. They became part of that radiance, like sparks returning to the sun. He did not envy them. He understood that his place was to watch the path, not to walk it. But sometimes, in the deep hours between dusk and dawn, he felt the faint tug of the beyond, a warmth that called to him as softly as a mother calling her child home. He would stand then upon the threshold, his wings half open, the light of the gate brushing against his form. He never crossed it. Yet he wondered, not with longing but with curiosity, what song might await him there, when his own time came to sleep. For even the eternal must one day rest. He thought of Nyx, his mother, who had vanished into the darkness of her own creation long ago. He felt her still, woven through every night sky, her presence the heartbeat behind all silence. He had not seen her since the first dawn, but he sensed that she watched him still, proud and patient. Sometimes he spoke to her, his voice carried by the wind. "Mother," he would whisper, "your son has learned what it means to end." The night would deepen, and in its stillness he would hear her answer, not in words but in the hush between the stars. He thought also of Hypnos, ever sleeping, ever dreaming. His brother had grown quieter, his dreams slower, as if merging with the great peace that now filled all realms. The two gods no longer met often, for their work had become indistinguishable. The one brought rest for an hour, the other rest for eternity. And yet, in the murmur of the dreaming world, Thanatos always felt his brother's presence. A reminder that every death is a sleep and every sleep a rehearsal for awakening. He wandered far then beyond the boundaries of all known lands. The earth had changed again. Mountains ground to sand, seas folded into new shapes, stars rearranged their constellations. But wherever he went he found peace. Mortals no longer built temples to defy time. They built gardens, places where the living and the dead might both be remembered. Their songs carried gratitude rather than grief. And in the soft rhythm of their lives, Thanatos felt his own reflection. One evening he walked along a shore where the tide glowed with the light of plankton, each wave a breath of blue fire. The horizon shimmered, half sea, half sky. As he stood watching, he sensed movement beside him, faint like a dream brushing against waking thought. He turned and saw a figure of light standing at the water's edge. Not mortal, not divine, but something between. It shimmered as if made of mist and memory. Thanatos recognized the resonance. It was one of the golden souls returned not as life but as presence. The being did not speak, it only bowed its head in greeting. Thanatos inclined his own in return. "You have gone far," he said, though the words were more thought than sound. The being lifted its face, and in its glow Thanatos saw reflections of 1,000 lives. Every kindness, every sorrow, every moment of beauty it had ever carried. The light pulsed once, softly, and then began to dissolve into the air, leaving behind a faint warmth that spread across the horizon. When it was gone, the night seemed brighter. Thanatos looked upward and saw that the stars had multiplied. Each one, perhaps, a soul that had found its final home. He smiled, the rare, quiet smile of one who has seen completion. "So it continues," he murmured. The waves lapped at his feet, whispering a rhythm older than any language. He closed his eyes and listened. It was the same sound he had heard since the first day, the sound of life and death in endless conversation. The universe was speaking to itself, and he was its breath. He walked on. The years flowed by like rivers, and even the gods began to fade into the myth they had once shaped. The world no longer needed their constant presence. It had learned to keep its own balance. Yet Thanatos remained, not as ruler, not as servant, but as companion. He was there when the last star of one age dimmed and when the first light of the next rose. He was there when the oceans cooled, when the skies turned violet again, when silence reclaimed the ruins of forgotten empires. And through it all he felt neither loneliness nor pride, only belonging. He began to sense that the time was nearing, not the end of all things, for endings were illusions, but the moment of his own return to the dream. The pull of the gate grew stronger, its light gentler, more familiar. It no longer called to him as a mystery but as a memory. One night he stood at the edge of the world once more, the sky vast and full of slow-turning stars. The air was cool, the wind quiet. The dreaming gate shimmered before him, its light neither gold nor silver, but a color beyond all names. It pulsed with the rhythm of the universe itself. Thanatos looked upon it and felt no hesitation. He understood that the cycle he had guarded was ready to complete itself, not in destruction but in fulfillment. He whispered into the silence. All things rest. Even the hand that guides must one day be guided. Even the keeper of endings must end. The gate brightened, its light embracing him like a dawn that rose from every direction at once. He stepped forward. He stepped forward. The light of the dreaming gate did not blind him. It was gentle like moonlight through water. Each step he took dissolved the boundaries of shape and sound, until even his wings were only a memory of motion. The air grew warm and endless. There was no ground beneath his feet, no sky above, only radiance pulsing with the rhythm of every heartbeat that had ever been. He felt no fear. Fear belonged to separation, and there was none here. He did not feel the need to breathe, yet each pulse of light through him was a breath, vast and kind. In that breath he felt the lives of all he had ever guided. The child's laughter, the soldier's sigh, the whisper of the poet, the last glance of the old. All of it flowed through him, and through that flow he understood that he had never been apart from them. He was not leaving them behind, he was joining them. The light deepened. Around him forms shimmered, not bodies, not faces, but essences. The souls of the golden ascent moved through the brilliance like slow comets, each carrying a tone of the great harmony. They did not speak, yet he heard them all. Their music was memory itself, rising and falling in patterns too vast for thought. He moved among them, a shadow woven of light. And as he passed, each soul brightened as though recognizing him, their old guide, their patient companion. They brushed against him like wind, and he felt gratitude, not in words but in warmth. Every touch was a farewell and a welcome at once. The deeper he went, the less he felt himself as a form. His wings became radiance, his armor the faint shimmer of night, his face a reflection of everything he had ever watched. He was becoming the horizon, the meeting of darkness and dawn. The rhythm around him changed, a low hum becoming a great chord. The gate was not an ending but a threshold, leading not to silence but to the purest music of existence. In that sound he felt Hypnos, felt Nyx, felt every god and mortal that had ever been. There was no difference now, only motion and rest, one within the other. He saw the dream of creation as it truly was, not a circle, not a spiral, but an endless wave. Each crest a birth, each fall a return, forever rising, forever folding back upon itself. And in its center, where no motion could be seen, was stillness, the heart of all things. It was there he was going. He reached the innermost light, where even the shimmer of form faded. It did not consume him, it invited him. He felt it touch him as gently as the wind touches water. Every memory he carried, the wars, the prayers, the laughter, the tears, blossomed into brilliance and then softened into peace. For a heartbeat, or for eternity, he remembered his first moment, Nyx opening her hands in the void, shaping him from the shadow between the stars. "You are the rest that gives life meaning," she had whispered. "You are the silence that teaches song." Now he understood. He had never been her creation alone. He was the reflection of the cosmos itself. The moment it learned to pause, he let go. The light flowed through him, filling the outline of what had been a god until there was no outline left. The breath that was his being merged with the breath of the universe. He did not fade. He expanded, his consciousness flowing outward through every rhythm, every life, every dream. In the mortal world the wind stirred. The flowers that grew upon graves turned their faces toward the dawn. Children dreaming of faraway stars smiled in their sleep. The oceans exhaled, and even the mountains seemed to lean a little closer to the sky. The world had changed, though few could name how. Something within it had softened, the edge of fear, the weight of loss. People began to sense, in the quiet moments before waking, that death was no longer a shadow waiting at the end, but a hand guiding them gently home. The dreaming gate still shimmered, but no longer as a boundary. It had become a pulse woven into all things, invisible yet present. In the pause between heartbeats, in the hush between one wave and the next. The rhythm of Thanatos. And though the god himself had passed beyond the reach of names, his essence remained in everything that ended gracefully, in everything that began with wonder. When the last light of a candle flickered, he was there. When a weary traveler lay down beneath the stars, he was the breath that carried them into rest. When a child took their first breath, he was the stillness before the cry. He had not vanished, he had become the memory of peace. Time went on, though it no longer felt like time. The universe expanded, contracted, dreamed itself anew. And within its dreaming, Thanatos remained, not as a being but as balance. The eternal return. The harmony of all opposites finding rest in one another. Far beyond what eyes could see, beyond even the reach of gods, there was a place where darkness and light were one, where all motion paused only to begin again. There, the first breath and the last were the same. There the silence sang. And in that endless, luminous stillness, a whisper moved, not of command or prayer, but of completion. Rest and awaken. All that was, all that is, all that will be, one. The whisper spread outward through creation, gentle as the tide. Stars pulsed in answer, dreams stirred, rivers turned, worlds breathed. The gate glowed once more, then faded into pure light. The story of Thanatos ended there, not with a closing but with an opening so vast it could hold every ending within it. The god of peaceful death had become what he had always served. The quiet pulse between heartbeats, the stillness at the center of motion, the eternal return. And so, the story of Thanatos, the gentle hand, the silent god, the keeper of endings, comes to rest. From the shadowed cradle of night he was born, and through the endless ages he walked unseen, shaping the balance that binds all life. He saw empires rise and fall, stars flare and fade, hearts open and close. He guided kings and beggars, children and gods, not to nothingness, but to the quiet where beginnings are born. He was never cruelty. He was never loss. He was the pause between songs, the sacred breath before dawn. When mortals feared him, he waited. When gods defied him, he endured. When the world forgot him, he watched and smiled. For Thanatos knew what all must one day learn, that death is not the enemy of life, but its most faithful companion. And in the end, when even eternity grew weary, he stepped into the light of his own making, not to vanish, but to become everything. The hush in every heartbeat, the silence beneath every wave, the peace that hums behind the turning of the stars. Now his name drifts like wind through the ages, not spoken in fear, but whispered in gratitude. For every time we close our eyes in rest, for every night that carries us into dream, we walk for a moment beside him, the God who loved the stillness enough to guard it forever. So sleep, traveler of the world. Sleep without fear. The night is not your ending. It is your return to the dream that never dies. And now, as the night deepens and the stars watch in silence, we leave the story of Thanatos behind. The god of peaceful endings, the guardian of dreams. May his calm guide you. May his stillness rest upon your heart. And may you remember that even the final breath is only another beginning. If your eyes grow heavy, let them close. If your thoughts begin to drift, let them go. The world will wait for you, just as he always waited for every soul, with patience and with love. Good night, traveler. Sleep peacefully. You are safe in the arms of eternity. Music fades to silence.